So let us begin with Kant and his experiment. We have to distinguish A, revelation, from B, pure religion of reason, which aligns with the distinction between B, biblical theology, and B, philosophical theology. Now, A can include B because of biblical revelation could include, say, a divine command to disregard certain philosophical arguments for God's existence, whereas B can't include any of the historical content of A. So I'll be able to regard A as the wider sphere of faith, which includes within itself B, the narrower one, like two concentric circles. The philosopher, as a teacher of pure reason, working only with a priori principles, must stay within the smaller circle and set aside anything learned from experience. From this standpoint, I can also run a second experiment. After setting aside the pure religion of reason, considered as a self-sufficient system, I can take some alleged revelation and conduct a piecemeal investigation of how it checks out against moral concepts, and then see whether it leads back to the pure religion of reason. The latter may be self-sufficient and adequate for the parts of genuine religion that concern the morality of conduct, and those parts are really the whole, because genuine religion is an a priori concept of reason with no empirical content, so that it exists only in this moral domain. Kant is making a contrast between the morality of conduct and materials that concern non-moral theories about what is the case, including ones about how best to go about teaching. If this experiment succeeds, we'll be able to say that reason is not only compatible with Scripture, but unified with it, so that if, guided by moral concepts, you follow one, you'll also conform to the other. Kant presents us with an experiment based upon a simple depiction of two concentric circles. Against the background of widespread contemporary discussions of revealed and natural religion, revealed religion can be regarded as the larger or wider circle, with the religion of reason then regarded as a smaller circle within. In the inquiry into religion, the philosopher, as purely a teacher of reason, thereby remains within the smaller circle and avoids appeal to the traits of revealed religion, for instance, scripture, history, and tradition. But since the experiment involves concentric circles and not two circles external to one another, the possibility is created of an overlap or commonality between revealed religion and the religion of reason. And if the philosopher were to discover such areas of overlap, then we shall be able to say that between reason and scripture there is not only compatibility, but also unity. Love God above everything and thy neighbour as thyself was quite wrongly regarded by Kant, this is Hegel's Spirit of Christianity now, as a command requiring respect for a law which commands love, and it is on this confusion of an utterly accidental kind of phraseology expressive of life with the moral imperative, which depends on the opposition between concept and reality, that there rests Kant's profound reduction of what he calls the command, love God first of all and thy neighbour as thyself, to his moral imperative, and his remark that love ought to take the meaning which he thinks must be given to this love, liking to perform all duties, cannot be commanded, falls to the ground by its own weight, because in love all thought of duty vanishes. Instead of metaphysics or epistemology as first philosophy, ethics is first philosophy. To coin a phrase of Levinas, for Manuel Levinas, ethics is the foundational philosophy arising from the face-to-face encounter with the other, preceding ontology and metaphysics, rather than the study of being or God as foundational. Levinas declares that ethics is prior to all theoretical knowledge. The encounter with the other establishes a primary responsibility that is primary to self-consciousness or conceptual thought, an encounter that is not about understanding or dominating the other, but responding to their presence to the face of the other. This absolute nakedness of the face, the absolutely defenseless face without covering, clothing, or mask, is what opposes my power over it, my violence, and opposes it in an absolute way, with an opposition which is opposition in itself. The being that expresses itself, that faces me, says no to me by his very expression. This no is not merely formal, but is not the no of a hostile force or a threat. It is the impossibility of killing him who presents that face. It is the possibility of encountering a being through an interdiction. The face is the fact that a being affects us not in the indicative, but in the imperative, and is thus outside all categories. Levinas's philosophy of ethics centers upon the idea that the moral ought is the pre-conscious responsibility to the other person, or the other. The encounter with the other is an encounter with a mystery, and we should respond to the other's call to give and serve. The face-to-face encounter the human faith orders and ordains us, and that we are ethically responsible to each other in face-to-face encounters. The other is a universe of mystery, and we should fill ourselves with awe, care, and concern for them. Responsibility, our moral dignity, constitutes our selfhood, and we are responsible to the other before any consideration of utility, virtue, or duty. It is the philosophy of ethics that raises the issue of the infinite demand of the ethical resolution. Breaking the bonds of love is to destroy the other and yourself simultaneously. This is the logic of love. This is the logic of the causality of fate. The flourishing and the very foundations of a life is intimately bound up with the flourishing and the foundations of everyone's life. As Karl Marx is supposed to have declared, as long as one is unfree, then all are unfree. This emerges as an idea in various places, like in the Communist Manifesto. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Social space is structured ethically or normatively, wherein subjects are moulded, given form or perhaps deformities, of a spiritual kind, freed or oppressed, and so on. Through this structuring governing their interactions with one another, and further than that, there is naught else. Ethical life is significantly independent of particular norms, laws, gains, and so on. Ethical life concerns the quality of an intersubjective life, and not a relation to some abstract morality. All of this prevents the metaphysics of life and love. The spirit of Christianity and its faith is grounded in the metaphysics of life and love. Love is the invisible bonds connecting us with others. Life is the interconnection of the practical and the biological aspects. The spirit of Christianity and its faith can certainly be considered as against theology rather than promoting it, for the Hegelian suggestion is that all Christian discourse concerning God is merely a means for expressing a metaphysics of life and love. Ethical life requires no transcendent God. Hegel is following on from the Kantian program and his own life of Jesus, taking up the question of there being an immanent God. With the absence of a transcendent God, we may as well make the move from pantheism to atheism, and with nothing to block the move, the fate of religion will be secularism. Upon the translation of Christianity into ethical terms, Hegel is merely following the model of Kant's religion within the limits of bare reason. Subsequent to rereading the Bible, Hegel translated into Kantian moral philosophy, and it was with the life of Jesus in the 1790s that Hegel came to see Kant as an obstruction here rather than a way forward. So the aim is to demonstrate that there is logic or experience implicit in early Christianity. It is just a matter of fact that it is there, and what Jesus is doing practically, which is to say disclosing the ethical content of theological discourse, Hegel is doing theoretically. Hegel and Jesus are singing from the same hymn book, reanimating theology, replacing law with love, and yet for centuries the aim has always been to turn Jesus into a transcendent thinker rather than an immanent one. But rather than thinking of religion, Christianity as religion within the limits of bare reason, we ought to think of it as a religion within the limits of life. So back to the spirit of Christianity. With Abraham, the true progenitor of the Jews, the history of this people begins. His spirit is the unity of soul, regulating the entire fate of his posterity. This spirit appears in a different guise after every one of its battles against different forces, after becoming sullied by adopting an alien nature, as a result of succumbing to might or seduction. Thus it appears in a different form, either as arms or conflict, or else as submission to the fetters of the stronger. This latter form is called fate. Of the course taken by the development of the human race before Abraham, of this important period in which men strove by various routes to revert from barbarism, which followed the loss of the state of nature, to the unity which had been broken, of this course only a few dim traces have been preserved to us. The impression made on men's hearts by the flood in the time of Noah must have been a deep distraction, and it must have caused the most prodigious disbelief in nature. Formerly friendly or tranquil, nature now abandoned the equipoise of her elements, now requited the faith of the human race had in her with the most destructive, invincible, irresistible hostility. In her fury she spared nothing, she made none of the distinctions which life might have made, but poured savage devastation over everything. Certain phenomena, reactions to the impression derived from this general manslaughter by hostile elements, has been indicated to us by history. If man was to hold out against the outbursts of a nature now hostile, nature had to be mastered, and since the whole can be divided only into idea and reality, so also the supreme unity of mastery lies either in something thought or in something real. It was in the thought product that Noah built the distracted world together again. His thought produced ideal he turned into a real being, and then set everything else over against it, so that in his opposition, realities were reduced to thoughts, to something mastered. This being promised him to confine within their limit the elements which were his servants, so that no flood was ever again to destroy mankind. Among living things capable of being mastered in this way, men were subjected to the law, to the command so to restrain themselves as not to kill one another. To overstep these restraints was to fall under the power of this being, and so to become lifeless. For being mastered in this way, man was recompensed by being given mastery over animals, but while the single rending of life, the killing plants of animals, was sanctioned, and while enmities between man and nature, which need made inevitable, were turned into a legal mastery, life was yet so far respected that men were prohibited from eating the blood of animals, because in it lay the life, the soul of the animals. So, with religion confined to the limits of life alone, there was not much left for God other than in the sense of being our relationship to one another. It is the metaphysics of life, as we can see through a reading of Kant's Critique of Judgment, and the question of parts and wholes. We can replace the relationship of universal to particular with the relationship of part and whole. Hegel sets this up as a structure of universal and particular, namely Noah, Abraham, the state, positive law, and replaces it with the logic of part and whole, namely love, Jesus, life. God becomes our relation to each other. Hegel presents a metaphysics of life which changes the relation of universal particular to a relation of part and whole to the whole. The language of life naturalizes ethical language. Discourse concerning life talk is discourse. Life discourse is discourse concerning living, dying, pain, being made fun of, demeaned, disrespecting, shamed, suffering. This is all life. The varying fortunes of the body map onto the varying fortunes of the spirit. This is quite literal transition from body to spirit. Talk of one is talk of the other. Yet as the language of life finishes up with pantheism, in the phenomenology of spirit, the language of love is replaced with recognition, and the language of life is spirit. We experience spiritual as well as biological deaths. Abraham was the true progenitor of the Jews, but we begin with an account of the flood and of the contrast with Noah and man and nature in opposition. Western rationality took off after Noah. Man and nature were in harmony, and there was no need to control nature. With the flood and nature proving to be indifferent to humankind, everything changes. The spirit of Christianity and its fate is a genealogy of morals directed against Kant's taken on board Judaic reasoning concerning what God's part in this really is, and the need to control nature. All concepts of God are concepts of life, or needs in life, and morality has an inner structure that is rationality or of the mastery of nature, an internalizing of the logic of nature, whereby to master ourselves is to master nature, this being an instrumental logic. The flood unleashes its destruction upon the state of nature. After a paradisical living in harmony with nature comes the flood, a constructive, invincible, irresistible hostility, a slaughtering, demonstrating how nature cares not a whit for us. So now we see that nature is something to be managed, to be controlled and mastered. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. Noah steps forward in response to the need to master this threatening nature, and hence what we have here is a genealogy of moral reasoning, the earliest gestures of the emergence of reason that occurs in the emergence of Judaism, and the emergence of Judaism is a taking apart of the logic of the response to the flood by Noah and Nimrod, so that rationality has its basic configurations in the idea of the mastery of nature, and for a profound understanding of Judaism, we have to work out in any argument what God means here, what he signifies. What are we talking about when we mention God? Are we talking about God? Where is God in this? What does the word God imply for our world? The outlying quality of Jewish life, the criticism of Judaism, an outlying quality of content and reason, derives from the fact that it assumes for itself a form of rationality designed to master hostile nature lying at the inner structure of morality, a replication of the rationality for the mastery of nature, applying the logic for the mastery of nature onto human relations, so that we subject ourselves to the same logic to which we have subjected nature. Nature is a narrative of instrumental reason, and yet Kant's philosophy was a critique of instrumental reason, to limit reason in order to make room for faith. By reason he means instrumental reason, or Newtonian scientific reason, the reason of the logic of cause and effect, the reason that understands the world through scientific rationality. And if everything is governed by the law of cause and effect, then there is no freedom. And if everything is governed by the laws of cause and effect, then we can understand science, given that science is a human product, the notion of truth, a human idea. And to preserve the value of truth, it is truth that has a value, and not nature. And science is to be limited to bring it within a notion of self-determining reason, and further to demonstrate that there is a different logic of morality. To go through that again, Kant contended he has to limit reason to make room for faith. His aspiration was to limit Newtonian science, cause and effect, our theoretical reason, to make room for faith. But Kant believed if Newtonian science expressed all rationality in the world, there would be no room, there would be no freedom. We could not understand science, since it's a human project. For truth, we must limit science and bring it to a self-determining reason, and then demonstrate there is a different logic of morality. Hegel contends Kant missed the mark, since his theoretical reason is not different from his moral reasoning. The same logic he critiqued, he brought into morality. Kant's project was therefore a critique of instrumental reason, and Hegel contends that in this he was unsuccessful, since his own idea of moral reason is in actual fact the same as his notion of theoretical reason. Practical reason and theoretical reason are not sufficiently different, and that therefore the same logic that he critiques is applied to morality. Hegel suggests two fundamental ways in which one can master nature through something real, that is to say, through some collective practical activity, by building a city or building a tower, Nimrod's solution, through collective practical activity or through something thought, Noah's solution, the invention of a Jewish God, which involves the positing of an ideal thing against hostile nature, and then is giving this ideal a reality, God. God is the master of the world, God the transcendental ego constituting the configurations of the world, and all the world is in essence thought as reality, since all the world is nothing but an object of God's intellect. In what way does thinking about God as a master of nature help us to master nature? By means of a contract. God promises to rein in the forces of nature on the conditions that human beings master their nature, mastering our desires for wickedness and bloodshed by obeying basic laws of conduct. Since God's relationship to nature is in actual fact always mediated by our relation to ourselves, by human obedience, the changeability of nature in the relation to human beings is only ever a record of human obedience and disobedience. Nature from such a perspective is naught but a sign of human beings' relationship to God. Nature is hostile if you have been sinning. It's kind if you've been good. And since nature is almost always possible one way or the other, then we have almost always sinning, hard-hearted people that we are. And so a continuous reiteration of the Old Testament means we are never going to get it right. And what is a vital issue in the relationship to God is our relationship to ourselves. Step forth Abraham. Through God alone, Abraham came into immediate relationship with the world, the only sort of link with the world possible for him. So back to the spirit of Christianity. The whole world Abraham regarded as simply his opposite. If he did not take it to be a nullity, he looked on it as sustained by the God who was alien to it. Nothing in nature was supposed to have any part in God, everything was simply under God's mastery. Abraham, as the opposite of the whole world, could have had no higher mode of being than that of the other term in the opposition, and thus he likewise was supported by God. Moreover, it was through God alone that Abraham came into immediate relation with the world, the only kind of link with the world possible for him. His ideal subjugated the world to him, gave him as much of the world as he needed, put him in security against the rest. Love alone was beyond his power, even the one love he had, his love for his son, even his hope of posterity. The one mode of extending his being, the one mode of immortality he knew and hoped for, could depress him, trouble his all-exclusive heart, disquiet it to such an extent that even this love he once wished to destroy. And his heart was quieted only through the certainty of a feeling that this love was not so strong as to render him unable to slay his beloved son with his own hand. Mastery was the only possible relationship in which Abraham could stand to the infinite world opposed to him, but he was unable himself to take this mastery actual. and if therefore remained ceded to his ideal. He himself also stood under his ideal's dominion, but the idea was present in his mind. He served the idea, and so he enjoyed his ideal's favour, and since its divinity was rooted in his contempt for the whole world, remained its only favourite. Hence, Abraham's God is essentially different from the Lavis and the national gods. A family which reverences its Lavis and a nation which reverences national God has admittedly also isolated itself, partitioned what is unitary, human life, and shuts others out of its God's share. But while doing so, it has conceded the existence of other Lavis. Instead of reserving the immeasurable to itself and banishing others therefrom, it grants to others equal rights with itself. It recognizes the Lavis and gods of others as Lavis and gods. On the other hand, in the jealous God of Abraham and his posterity, there lay the horrible claim that he alone was God, and that this nation was the only one to have a God. So, in the first instance, Abraham has a direct relationship to the world, and then via this story, the relationship is going to go via God, so that Abraham is never in direct relationship to the world. Noah and Nimrod represent the two faces of Kant's critical project. Nimrod is a sigler for the Kantian understanding. Noah is a sigler for reason. They represent the understanding and reason respectively, and are the only two possible relationships to the world, conceived by instrumental rationality, representing two sides of a self-defeating strategy, making peace with the enemy and perpetuating the hostility.